Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Get your soul fed and your spirit read.
This here ain't no trend. I possess the power from way back when folk was stripped from all of their kin, so they had to find the magic within. So I got on my ancestors to gather my herbs. I conjure at my altar. Hoodoo Plant Mamas. I manifest growth and I release trauma.
Child, we just out here trying to water our plants and mind our business, you know? Everybody ain't from the deep south, man. Everybody can't have culture like us.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Today we're going to be doing something a little different. Leah, also our resident published author, is going to be our guest today. So we're going to talk a little bit about Leah's latest book, Apocalypse Steel. But before we get into that, let's do a quick check-in. Leah, how are you this week?
I am doing pretty good. This is our season finale, so I'm kind of excited. I think we had a good season, and I'm just kind of excited for the summer. Next week, I get my nephew, so he gets to stay with me. So, a lot I'm looking forward to. What about you?
Thank you for reminding me because I literally was sitting here and I was like, oh, yeah, this is our season finale. And it has been a good season. It feels like it went by really fast. I'm doing pretty good. In all honesty, I'm a little anxious, just like work stuff, and then I'll be traveling soon. And I don't know. I always get anxious when traveling. I haven't even been one of those people who have had a super bad TSA experience. Let me knock on wood. But I still get extremely anxious going through TSA. Like I just get me the fuck out of here. So yeah, traveling can be stressful, being on the plane all up under people and their germs.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I think I'm doing okay. I'm ready to have like a I don't know if you remember the summer of 2016. I feel like for most people, that was just like a summer. And I really want to have that kind of summer safely, obviously, because we are we not having the same, like it's so many other things going on that wasn't happening in 2016. But I just really want to have a fun summer with my friends. So
Do want to say I do remember summer 2016. I remember everybody else having fun because I was working on my honors project. So I was in the library reading and writing. And I was like, y'all look like y'all having fun, but I got to get to work. Yeah, it was
I feel
upsetting.
that. No, I feel that. Well, let's get into some gratitude. What are you thankful for today?
I'm going to say I am thankful for this podcast. I am thankful for all of our listeners, all of the people who have reached out to us this season, for the different episodes that we've had and who have shared how much they love us. Like it really fills me with gratitude to see like our work being appreciated.
I feel like I've said this several times in several seasons, but I'm really thankful for this podcast for the same reasons. And I'm thankful to be here. Last year was kind of rough, and I've been trying to like really get myself together this year. A lot is changing with me, but I'm just thankful to be like pushing through and just trying to stay open to, the table spirit has set for me. I'm trying to believe that it's there, and I just got to rise to the occasion. So, all right. Well, Leah, can you briefly tell us a little bit about Apocalypse Steel? Just like if you had to put it together like in a bow, like a summary, can you tell us a little bit about it?
So, Apocalypse Steel is a speculative fiction collection. It's a mix of horror, fantasy, sci fi, and some general fiction. They are slightly interconnected. Some of the characters do reoccur, some of the themes reoccur. And it's really a collection of these Black women and these Black girls who are put in difficult situations and who are having to kind of fight their way through to survive.
Before I get into my first question, I would like to say if there's anybody here who is affiliated with the Black Girl Survives in this one horror anthology, if y'all do another one, Leah needs to be in it. Like I actually had to like go back because I was literally getting your book. Like I was getting stories in that book like mixed up with stories in your book because I just Yeah, you should have been in it. I don't know why you weren't on the list, but I really hope they do another one, or if somebody decides to put one together, another one that you're in it, because yeah, this was like a really great speculative horror sci-fi collection. So I want to talk about the title story, Apocalypse Steel. There's so many parallels with this story and the actual pandemic. So basically there's like this zombie apocalypse type thing, like a zombie virus that turns people into zombies. And it parallels a lot with the actual pandemic we're experiencing. And when you put it into context with what we've been witnessing around the country regarding masks and COVID transmission, it honestly makes you realize how silly folks like sound, thinking that a virus that has killed millions of people. I actually went and looked at the number before we recorded, and it's like millions. And that's only in the US, not even worldwide. Like, yeah, people just thinking like somehow it's now harmless. And even thinking about like how honestly it was even worse when we were in the middle of still trying to figure out what it is, no vaccine, people just dropping like flies, and niggas were still being in denial. People were still being resistant to masking. And it's just like, wow, this story really is like a mirror to that, to those shenanigans. I'm just curious what has been like the general response to this story.
So I want to say that I wrote this right after the first time I had COVID. And so that's the reason for a lot of these parallels. I got COVID right after all the restrictions lifted, when they got rid of mask mandates and all of that. That's when I got sick. So for the most part, a lot of people have enjoyed this story. They found that it's resonated with them and like what it represents. One thing I do find interesting is that white readers will say that this is their favorite story or this is the best story in the collection. And so I find it very interesting when people tell me what their favorite story is, because I want to know like why it would appeal to them. And so I think for this one, I think it's because it's the one that is like talks the least about race, either explicitly or implicitly. So
That's a really good point. I didn't even think about that. I like this story. It's hard to say what my top favorite story is, but the ones that I'll talk about today are my favorite. So I don't
okay.
know what the ranking system is, but overall it was a really strong collection. And we've talked about this. When you do a collection, it's really, when you read them, like for other authors, it could be hit or miss. Sometimes there might be one or two stories that are good and the rest are you just like not connected with it. And then some people, it's like most of them are good, you know? So it's, I feel like I got that experience with this book, and I'm not being biased, y'all. Like, I'm just saying, okay? The work speaks for itself. All right. Which story did you find the most difficult to write in this collection?
There were a few different ones that I struggle with, and I struggle with them for different reasons. Like Superhuman, which is this future where only Black people have superpowers. I wrote that like 6 different times. I wrote it in different POVs. I wrote it past tense, future tense. I had the same event, but I was struggling between like, how do I share what I know about the story with the audience in a way that is like seamless and cohesive. And so I struggle with that one for that reason. I struggle with Collapsed because it's a very dark story. I think it's one of the darkest ones in the collection. And I did not want it to be that dark, but at the end I was just like, it is what it is. And so that, and then I also struggle with Antenna, mainly because it's long. It's a beast. It's a beast. There was a lot that I wanted to cover, and I was trying to like cover it in a way that the reader could understand and keep them engaged, keep them interested. But yeah, it was a lot to write. It's a lot to read. So yeah, those were my 3 that I really struggled with.
I'm glad you mentioned those three, because those were among three of my favorites, which is so funny. Like, I would have never known that you struggled with those. Well, I could see Collapse. Collapse was tough. Like, that was dark. And I know you said some people have said that the entire collection feels dark, but like, nah, that one story though, it had me, it was on my mind. So, speaking of superhuman and just like this superhuman trope, so everybody remembers, if you don't, I guess you weren't on Twitter, this weirdo, and I'm calling this person a weirdo because they actually had some other really fucked up views and conspiracy type stuff. But one of their tweets went viral of them saying on December 21st, Black people were going to get superpowers. We all know 2020 was like 5 years long. So that happened. And it was a good time. Like December 21st was a good time. Lots of great memes. Like it was fun. And that has just been something that has just like followed us. And so in this collection, there's some shift that has happened where Black people have turned superhuman, but somehow that superhumanness has not saved them from becoming a target of white supremacy, nor, it hasn't saved them from capitalism. So I'm interested to know, can you talk more about that trope that comes up in this collection regarding Black people and sort of where it came from for you as a writer?
Where it came from for me, I would say more as a person, I was struggling with like how often people would call me strong or brave because I didn't think that I was. And there had been many times where I was like put in these difficult situations and I had to make tough decisions. One was the first and only full time job that I've ever worked. I was dealing with racial discrimination by a boss. He was a white man. And I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. I was breaking out in hives. I was having panic attacks constantly. And I ended up reporting him. And so there was this older white lady. She had worked there for 5 years and she had seen it happen. She had seen people come and go. She basically did nothing about it. And when she found out that I reported him, she was like, "You're so brave." And I was like, I am not brave because I'm trying to be like courageous or anything. It's either me say something or me continue to suffer. Those were my only options. And so I said something because I did not want to continue to suffer. And so I think so often for Black people, we are told, like, oh, you're going to save this country, you're going to do all of these great things. And it's like, why is it on us to save everybody? Right? What about this country is worth saving when they continuously shit on us? Like, how are we going to be rewarded for that? Is the reward even enough? So those were a lot of the things I was thinking about, this idea of Black people being super strong, super brave.
One thing that came up in Superhuman that I remember being annoyed by, but it was like very much something that would be like a point of contention in the community, was like people basically saying Black people who were like pushing back and like using their superhumanness against, the oppressor, was like making it harder for everybody else and da 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 da. It's kind of what we're seeing now, like people's trying to police how folks of color engage in resistance, especially after decades upon decades of violence and oppression. We are seeing how it's happening. We're seeing how it's unfolded. Whether you're peaceful or not, these people do not give a fuck. But it was just like when that came up, it was like, damn, you got superhuman abilities and y'all still are demanding, even other Black people demanding that Black people be docile in the face of literally Black people were facing a crisis that was happening in the community. And there were some Black people that was like, we not having it. We know who some of the perpetrators are and we're going to handle it violently because what's happening to us is violent. So yeah, that was something that stood out to me in that, and it was just like, damn, that would happen. That would happen. So, Runaway. This story, me and you have talked. You already know my stance on, I don't particularly like slavery movies, shows. People keep, because I'm a horror girly, people keep recommending Lovecraft Country. Keep it away from me. All right, stop recommending it. I don't want it.
The first episode is really difficult to watch.
That's what I keep hearing. Like, I'm a horror girly Anyway, we actually, I want to talk about that next season about horror and like what it does for the anxiety, the very anxious folks, but why I still have boundaries. So yeah, so this is a story that centers enslaved people. And when I first started it, yeah, I was nervous. I was like, oh Lord, because these sort of stories, whether it's in film or in print, they do something to my nervous system. Like it's always been that way. And it's something that now as I get older, I've just honored that this is not for me, like in certain instances. But in this particular story, there was like this underlying power, and like even when it was getting bad, there was like this hopefulness. And then we end on like this really powerful moment, and I feel like we needed that because this was one of those stories where I think as a reader, you already expecting it to go left because we've seen this story. Like we know like these things happen. We know that enslaved folks tried to run, and a lot of them, I know we talk about all the enslaved folks that Harriet Tubman and like other people helped free, but a lot of them died. Like a lot of people also died. Probably a lot more died trying to run. What you get all the way up into the end, like I just love how that ended. And even though I was nervous about it, I really appreciated how it ended. Can you tell me the inspo behind this story, or just what were you thinking when you approached it and the characters? Because I can imagine, I just think for Black people in general, even if I don't read it when they write like stories about enslaved folks, I know that it's hard. Like in my mind, that's a really difficult character to be inside of. So I'm interested to know what that was like.
I think you're definitely right. Like, these were difficult topics for me to write, these were difficult characters for me to channel. And so, you talk about the ending being powerful and worth it. It needed to be powerful and worth it for me too to also sit down and to write them. Like I said earlier, what made Collapse so hard was the ending of it. If the story felt like there was some hope or some redemption, then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can sit down and write this because I'm working towards something hopeful. For the inspiration behind this, I was thinking about a lot of different things as I wrote it. So my friend told me about Lover's Leap in Jamaica, and it's this thing where like these two, and I don't know the exact, I'm trying to repeat from my memory, but these two enslaved people on neighboring plantations were in love with each other, and they wanted to run away together, and they were being tracked to a cliff, and then they jumped off together holding hands. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about Dolores Kendricks, who I was introduced to Women of Plums. She was in Soul Talk, and she talked about channeling enslaved ancestors and trying to bring their voices through. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking about ancestors' dreams and how often we conflate like what our ancestors wanted with what we want. And sometimes that's not always the case. I was trying to think about like what are the things they actually wanted. And then there was also the line that they took mama away that just kept repeating in my head. So I was mixing this with all of these different ideas I had, and when I got they took mama away, I was like, okay, where can I go with this? And that was kind of the story that I came up with. Like you, I am also not a fan of stories about slavery. And I think it's because it's mainly told by white people, and it focuses too much on like physical and sexual violence. It makes a spectacle out of slavery, and it renders the enslaved people as one dimensional. As my ancestors, like I'm curious about their inner lives. And I've been thinking a lot about, I watched this TV show. It's called Primal. It's a cartoon, and it follows this like prehistoric human. One thing I think is interesting is, one, it showed like a lot about his thoughts, and you could see a lot about his feelings, his emotions, his inner lives, even though he doesn't speak. Something that I thought was really interesting was like, if there's no record of your thoughts, if there's no record of your lives, the West assumes that it's not there, but it is there. And so I want to know more about that. I wanted to know more about what my ancestors felt, what slavery felt like in the body. And that's where like Lucy's jitters came from, I feel like they would be terrified having to live a life like this. And I really hate the whole like, oh, they were stoic in the face of all this terror. They were brave. Again, I really hate those narratives. And so I wanted to know more about their inner lives. I wanted to know more about their joys and their hopes and what broke their heart. Like a really good source that I found was When I Was a Slave. There are a few different collections like that. It's from the WPA, Works in Progress Administration, where they interviewed formerly enslaved people. But I found that that was a very well-rounded collection, and it answered a lot of the questions that I had about enslaved people and their interior lives.
Yeah, I can admit that thinking about my enslaved ancestors is really hard for me. Like, even when I try to, like, just think back or imagine it, it's really difficult. I feel like it does the same thing to my nervous system that reading about it does. But I did want to say too about the ending, because I don't want to make it seem like the ending was like a cheesy sort of redemption, because there is still questions. Like, you're still left with questions, but you're not ending on like just 100%. This ends how we expect it to end. We don't know, but as a reader, we're able to walk away with like this sense of like hopefulness. To me, that matters, and I think it goes into the story that you mentioned a couple of times, because it is, I would say, the only reason I probably can't call it my top favorite story, I guess, because it's dark, but I do but I do think it's one of the strongest stories in this collection to me. It is, to me, very dystopian. You know, me and you talked outside of the podcast about how you didn't see any other alternative to how it ended, and it really reminded me of Get Out and all the alternative endings, and how the original ending, like, if you saw it in theaters, or I guess if you saw it on streaming services, I don't know how they go about that, but the original ending wasn't like a bad ending. It was actually surprising. And in truth, I think for a lot of Black people, because I saw some of the discourse, it wasn't realistic. But some of those alternative endings, people, I guess, found more realistic. I did not watch that because we've already talked about my stance on that. Like, I'm okay with, Black people not always having to die at the end, or some other super traumatic shit. But I was recently reading a book by Julian Randle, called The Dead Don't Need Reminding. And that movie, Get Out, came up in comparison to what Lena Waithe did with Queen and Slim, and basically making the main characters martyrs in a way that I just felt was like really not, it wasn't effective. It didn't really make sense. Like, I personally didn't see any real purpose behind it. And they weren't the only martyrs. I believe that movie really played on like this sort of spectacle trope of Black life and police violence, not in a smart way, in my opinion. Now, that's just my opinion. I know some people really like this movie, weirdly enough. With your ending, that was not a quote unquote, happy ending, I didn't get that feeling. As I was revisiting it, I was thinking a lot about our last episode with Austin, and about imagination, and how that might be connected to this feeling of, this was the only way it could have gone, and this is as far as like my mind can go with it. So I'm really interested to know, like, why did you feel like this story couldn't have ended any other way? And I'm not asking as somebody that disagrees, because literally after I read it, I was literally thinking in my head, like, what other way could it have gone, especially once it hit the fan? Like, even I couldn't imagine it ending any other way. I just feel like at some point it was gonna go left. Like, even if it didn't end like that, I couldn't see it ending well. So yeah, I'm interested to know what that, like, just your thinking behind it.
I thought Gada was an interesting character. Like, her main motivation is taking care of her brother, which makes sense when she's lost everything, when her society, the world she lives in, has collapsed, and she has these powers, but she feels powerless. And so when she finally has this into a place that has electricity, it has water, it has food, it has all these things that she needs. She's just like, I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna get what I need, I'm gonna get out. I fuck the rest of y'all. I'm gonna make sure me and my family are taken care of. And like she's super hyper independent in that way. And so I was thinking about her going into this hostile system that she doesn't know much about. She's trying to get as much as she can and get out of there. And I think realistically there really was no way that I think someone can like go into a system and not have it affect you and or not try to kill you. Like I think of someone like AOC who was lauded as like this progressive years ago, but we've come to see how she's negotiated a lot of her values to stay in the place that she's in. And so I don't think we can go into these hierarchical systems and get what we need to survive and it not affect us in some way.
That's a really good point. And now that I think about it, that whole setup was given COs, like correctional officers, who are in most cases really evil. Like if you think about the system of slavery, which is prison, there's the warden, the master, and then there's the overseer, who is, when we read about it, is typically the most brutal but has the least amount of power. Those are correctional officers. They are so fucking evil. And I have a family member, I won't say who it is, but I have a family member who was briefly a correctional officer, and how when he would stop them from beating up on, mind you, a CO in a juvenile facility, when he would stop them from like beating up on kids or bullying kids, he became an enemy. And a little bit before he quit that job because he just couldn't take it, they had a meeting and he almost got into a fight because he was like, people were saying like some people around here not loyal and da 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 da. And it's like, oh, this is a gang. Like this is a gang. Like y'all get off on terrorizing even children. He ended up quitting. That's why like I'm not really down with the like changing shit from the inside. No shade to your little brother or your son who wants to be a cop. Like there are no good cops. The good cops quit. Like they don't last very long. I would argue that anybody who had the potential to be a good cop probably didn't even make it through the academy. Like and literally when you try to be a good cop, they turn on you. They'll kill you. They will kill you. Literally. So when I think about that, even if it hadn't ended the way it ended, I feel like she still could have possibly been corrupted, like eventually. That's also what I thought about as I was watching this happen. And just the fact that like it wasn't like flat out slavery, but it was a step down. And it was like literally y'all are doing all this evil shit for breadcrumbs just so wealthy people can continue to have like a normal life. And that's not too far from where we are now. So, getting to Antenna, which was a story I actually, maybe this is my favorite story. Like, all of these are my top favorites, but I think maybe Antenna is actually my favorite. It low key, well, you know, I wrote that piece about how I resonated with it personally, but it also, I know this is so left field, but it did remind me of Space Traders a little bit, which I know for some people might be a reach, but just that idea of niggas leaving the planet just immediately takes me there. When you put up against collapse and the billionaires essentially doing exactly what most of us expect them to do after they finish destroying the earth, it's interesting because here you have the humanoids like planning to leave the earth under sort of like different circumstances. And this is an oppressed group, sort of like a group that is seen a particular way in society, but they're talking about leaving the earth that is being destroyed for a different reason. And so can you talk about the parallel with collapse? And like in that question, was ableism, neurodivergence, or both something that you were interrogating with Antenna?
In regards to the parallel with collapse, the collection's interconnected. So collapse takes place a few decades after Antenna. And so collapse references the billionaires leaving, but Antenna tells the real story of like the billionaires, quote unquote.
Now I gotta go back and like reread again because I don't know how I missed that, but okay, that's good to know.
And then Antenna does at the end, it talks about how the zombie apocalypse is about to come to the USA. And so that's the first story as well. So they're all interconnected. As for ableism and neurodivergency, I was interrogating both in this piece. The entire piece is about autism, and Eumista is an anagram for autism. There's a lot of little Easter eggs in there about this being autism. So the story for me was about learning the truth about autism, kind of how often autistic, especially autistic women, autistic people of color, are misdiagnosed with something else, but it's actually another thing, and kind of having your whole world shattered, your whole sense of identity being shattered. And then you're having to face this difficult decision of, do I continue to mask to live in the society that I'm in, or do I unmask, whatever that means? And so for me, like, I was a bit pessimistic. I don't think it's possible to fully unmask, but we can get close to it. So that's kind of why Antenna ended where it did. Because for me, it was about this decision of, should I or should I not so much about whether or not they do it. Like Toni Morrison talked about how, like, the grandeur of life is the attempt, it's not about the solution. And so that's a lot of why Antenna ended where it did.
Now I'm rethinking everything. I know you said this before, that the stories were interconnected. Sometimes my brain just makes a choice to read things individually, even when I see the themes. But that's thinking about the truth versus what Gotta in Collapse believed happened, because it was confusing for me when you get to this facility with these wealthy people, because to me it's given they billionaires, but their position is like millionaires. So yeah, I don't know, it's complicated for me, and now I gotta go back and like revisit. But thank you for reminding me that. And I don't think my brain said autism specifically, but it definitely gave like neurodivergence, but also just like the ways in society, like people are just always ready to like diagnose. That's not saying like diagnosis is like not necessary, but it's like some shit is getting pathologized that doesn't have to be, and that pathology is like putting people in a unsafe position. Did you have anything else you wanted to add regarding our conversation, or just like who you hope this book finds?
I hope this book finds people who like to think and who like to like chew on big questions, even if they don't have an answer to it. I know some people have gotten frustrated with where a lot of these stories end. It was like that in my writing group. They were like, I want more. And I was like, I ain't got more. You're going to have to deal with what you get. But if you like just chewing on stuff and being like, I don't know what this means, but let me think about it, da, 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 I think this would be a good collection for you.
Agreed.
Also, if you like dark stories as well, because apparently they are darker than I thought they were. So
Listen, y'all, we living in dark times. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you better try to find solace in black sci-fi speculative horror, because I'd argue it might be good preparation. Let's take a break and then we'll come back and talk more about like the writing process. Let's get into some ways you can support the Hoodoo Plant Mamas. One is through our bookshop, where you can buy the books that we previously discussed. We have a Hoodoo Beginner's Guide. Leah and I share our top reading picks, and we have the books from our Writing the Spirit guests. Every purchase you make helps support our show. Check us out at bookshop.org/shop/Hoodoo Plant Mamas, or the link in our show notes.
other ways you can support us include rating and reviewing the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Check out our Patreon, where we share exclusive video, plant, and spiritual content for only $3 a month. If you prefer a one-time donation, you can donate via Cash App, hashtag Hoodoo Plant Mamas, or our PayPal, hoodooplantmamas@gmail.com. Let's get back to the show.
All right, welcome back. Let's get into the writing. So, as someone struggling with this, how did you motivate yourself to write? Like, because you was writing, like you was writing. And so, like, did you set weekly or daily goals? Like, how did you go about getting this done?
I was in a writing group where we had to submit a piece a month. So I had external motivation to write. That was really helpful for me because it got me into the habit of writing regularly. And so now I write regularly just out of practice. And I also had to learn how to develop tools for when I sit down and write. And one of the biggest ones for me is plotting or outlining. So just sitting down, plotting the major events that are going to happen in a story. So that way, when I have the urge or when I have the time to sit down and write, and I'm like, what do I want to write? I just consult my outline and be like, I want to write that today. So that's how I had got in the habit of sitting down and writing. As for my goals, like my formula for writing goals depends on how much time I have and what's my max word count. And so for me, I can usually write 3 to 5 days a week. My max word count is about 3,000 words a day. I can do that. It is very mentally exhausting for me. And so I divided it into something that is a lot easier for me, which is 1,000 words. So my goal is 1,000 words a day, 3 to 5 days a week. And if I don't write 1,000 words, that's fine as long as I wrote something. If I do write 1,000 words, that's even better. I don't beat myself up about it. I just congratulate myself for trying. And I also take a lot of breaks. And so for me, I have been like extremely productive doing this.
Yeah, I think not shaming yourself is important. Can you talk about the role your spiritual practice and ancestors played in your writing process when it came to this book?
Yes. So a lot of these stories started out as dreams. The first one was actually entangled. It was a nightmare that I had about this guy I used to be friends with in high school. And he was like, oh, I want you to meet some friends of mine. And it was like the Klan, and they were trying to hunt me. And then I woke up at 2 in the morning and I was like, oh my God. And I couldn't go back to sleep because I was terrified. And so I ended up going to the altar about it. And I was like, what the fuck do I do with something like this? Like, I'm terrified to go back to sleep. And that's when I was like, you know what? What if I wrote this and kind of changed the ending so that way, for me, I felt safer going back to sleep. And so that's how I came up with Entangled. And then earlier that year, so this was in 2020, earlier that year, I had started writing down my dreams. And so in 2020, my dreams were super apocalyptic and I had all of these dreams written down. And so the ones that I thought were really great ideas or really like exciting and interesting dreams, I was like, okay, we're gonna we're gonna make these into short stories. And anytime I got stuck or anytime I needed to talk through an element of the story, I was at the altar, I was asking questions, I was just trying to get guidance for how to shape this collection and how to shape this book.
That was another story that, like, oof, yeah, it was. That story was dark. Actually, I think I just tried to put it out of my brain. So it was white people involved in a very like way.
You read the original version of that and you
Mm.
gave me some really good feedback on it that I did not know how to incorporate until like 2 years later. So I rewrote that for this collection.
That's a tough story too. I was gonna say I love that it's something really like beautiful about writing an alternative ending for yourself or something that like was terrifying for you. And I feel like it goes back to that black people getting a chance to have an alternative ending. I use Get Out as an example, and I know his alternative endings were like dark, but I feel like the original ending is an alternative ending to something we seldom get. And I just feel like that's something we deserve. And I think that's sometimes what I need. Like, I know not every story is going to end happy, but I don't know what we gain at this point from constantly writing Black stories that we get the ending that this country has constantly gave us over and over again. I really think
Mhm.
there's like power in us writing down alternative endings for ourselves. I actually think there's something really spiritually powerful about that. Like, I think it moves something.
It reminds me of our episode with Austin of like dreaming a new dream, because all that they can imagine for us is death and terror and brutalization.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like, we have to be able to write down. Like, if our ancestors hadn't have dreamed something better, like, we wouldn't be here. Like, as rough as things are, we still have it a lot better than them. We still have a lot more autonomy and freedom than they did. And so we then have to continue to pay that forward and keep going. Like, some of what we have the like ability to dream, they didn't. We even farther than probably what they dreamed, but we have to continue to take it a step further because we know that we deserve better. Like, this ain't enough. It's not enough. So yeah, I love that in regards to that story. So what did you learn about yourself while writing this book?
I think most importantly, I learned how to trust myself as a writer. So when I started with my writing group, I was still like kind of insecure about my writing. I had this huge stack of rejections, and I kept trying to repeat Octavia Butler's like rejections are a sign of a true writer, and it didn't work for me. Affirmations don't really resonate with me, but like over the course of writing this book, I experimented with a lot of different forms and different styles, different voices, different types of characters, different modes of storytelling. And some of them worked and ended up in the final product. Some of them did not work and they are on my drive. But by the end of it, I could confidently like figure out what my stories were missing and how to fix them. I could trust my stories, trust my characters, and I could trust my abilities to bring them to life.
Well, before we end, did you have any final thoughts, or do you have any projects you're working on that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for interviewing me. Thank you for reading the book. Apocalypse Still is available online pretty much everywhere. Right now, I have a poetry chapbook that is coming out June 11th, 2024. It is a chapbook that is about heartbreak, both personal and political. It uses nature imagery in a lot of it, and so it's poems that I've held on to for like over a decade. I'm like, this year I promised myself I will put them out in the world. So they come out June 11th, 2024. I'm also currently working on a romance series that's supposed to come out sometime next year. So we'll see.
Period. I'm so excited to see Black girls getting into their romance bag, because clearly we need it. Every time I see a video, I'm like, oh, I see what y'all are up against. I'm so glad y'all are coming up in the spot and busting it up, because woo. Well, thank you for letting me interview you, and thank you for writing this book. I'm really proud of you for betting on yourself and putting this book out, and I'm excited to read everything that's to come. And thank you, everybody else, for listening. As Leah said, you can find her book everywhere. I would recommend that you buy it directly from our bookshop. Amazon is not that girl. Like, I know it's easy, but like, please go to bookshop. If you can. All right. Well, if you like this episode, you can like, rate, and review Hoodoo Plant Mamas on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If anything from the show resonated with you, make sure to share with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Thank y'all for listening this season. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.